Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flack.
Abide in me, and I in you. As a branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. Those words of Jesus are found in John chapter 15, verse 4. I'm your host, Sandra Flack. Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, where you will find encouragement, resources, and community. As a mom of 8, 5 through adoption, including 2 young adult sons, both diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome when they were little, I understand the challenges that come with raising children with trauma and prenatal substance exposure. So I am here for you, and I'm here with you. I'm thrilled to offer my newest book as a resource for your journey, Soul Care Saturday, 52 Devotions for Foster and Adopted Moms, now available on Amazon. So excited about how this devotional book turned out. Jamie Finn from Foster the Family kindly wrote the foreword in the book, and it's just perfect for us busy moms. There's 52 devotions, one a week. So if you just have time to get in one, there's also additional scripture verses to look up and kind of go deeper in the topic for the week if you have time and would like to do that. There's a breath prayer to practice every week. There are journaling pages, and it's filled with beautiful illustrations inspired by my favorite place in the world, the Adirondack Mountains, where I spend a lot of my time. So the whole book is designed to minister to your heart and refresh your spirit. So I hope you will grab a copy today. Go over to Amazon. You can order it. And if you do, and you get it and you love it, please go back onto Amazon and leave a review. I'm still aiming for 50 reviews, and I think we're at 30. So you could help out with that, and I would greatly appreciate it. Also, I would love it if you would like and follow our social media pages for the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, both on Instagram and on Facebook. So I hope you will do that because I love connecting with you. I love getting emails from you, and I love meeting you in person. And I am booking my 2026 calendar. So by the time you hear this podcast, my travel for the spring conference season will have come to a close. I have a busy summer because we have a wedding. Our one of our daughters is getting married in July, and I'm also hosting a retreat in the Adirondack Mountains for our members, the moms who are part of our Hope for the FASD Journey support community. So I think we've got about 15 moms coming in from all over the country to spend a few days with me in the mountains for some soul care. So we are doing that. So my July is super booked up, but I am beginning to schedule things for the fall. In September, I will be at the Christian Alliance for Orphans Summit in Atlanta. That's the September 23rd through 25th. And I will also be at the Replanted Conference retreat, really, for foster and adoptive parents in Chicago, October 15th through 17th. But I've got room in my calendar for your event. So if you would like to bring me in to speak at your event, if your church, your foster adoptive parent support group, your agency, your organization would like to have me come in and speak on FASD, I'm always available to do that. And I also do retreats and speak and encourage foster and adoptive moms. So all kinds of ways I can serve you. Just reach out to me. My email address is in the show notes. It's super simple, maybe not super simple, but it's my name, Sandra Flack, at justicefororphansny.org. It's in the show notes, so you can find it that way. You can reach out to me. Also, please reach out to me if you have a question about FASD or anything we talk about on the show. If you have a suggestion for a guest, or you just want to connect, please reach out to me, email me. I will check the email and get back to you personally because I do love to connect, as I mentioned. So today we're connecting with a fellow adoptive mom and interviewing and chatting with adoptive moms, one of my favorite things to do. And I also love it when I can bring together a guest who is not just an adoptive mom, which there's no just in that, but you know what I mean? She's an adoptive mom, my favorite, but she's also a professional. So when you bring those two pieces together, I feel like we have such a well-rounded guest that can really speak to us today. So I'm super excited to bring you Melanie Villalta. Melanie is a licensed clinical social worker and an adoptive mother living in Athens, Georgia. She has over a decade of experience working with the adoption constellation, including birth families, foster families, and adoptive families. Melanie is trauma informed and enjoys walking alongside each member of the adoption constellation as they heal from the pain of their past. She works from an attachment framework and strives to meet clients where they are in their current season of life. Melanie recognizes that in order to live the life we hope to live, we must heal from past hurts and unmet needs while also taking responsibilities for the choices we make today. She is passionate about helping parents create the felt safety their children need in order to heal and thrive. She is also a certified EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing coach, has completed training by becoming an adoption competent therapist, and has received training in child parent psychotherapy, dyadic developmental psychotherapy, and theraplay. I told you she was a professional. Melanie specializes in working with children, adolescents, and young adults dealing with trauma, complex trauma, dissociative disorders, depression, anxiety, and attachment needs. Please welcome to the show, Melanie Villalta. Hey, Melanie, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Sandra. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I am super excited. We connected, I believe, through a mutual acquaintance, um, through Lifeline, right? Lifeline Children's Services. So I'm thrilled to have you here so that our listeners can get to hear your story and learn from you and all of the incredible work that you're doing. So thank you for being here. And yeah, let's start with, because you're an adopted mom, so I always love to get that story, right? So what led you and your husband to pursue foster care and adoption?
Good question. So actually on our second date, my husband and I talked about adoption. We knew early on we always wanted to adopt. It was close to both of our hearts. He had been adopted by his stepfather, and that was really meaningful to him. And I just always known the Lord had called me to adopt. So fast forward to several years later after we got married, really, I guess it was 7 years after we got married, a friend of ours was fostering a teenager and her young daughter. But even the story behind that is really interesting because you can see the Lord's hand in that this mom, she had been sitting in church one day and had a vision of them accepting a pregnant mother into their home. And so she contacted their foster placing, their agency. And the agency said, I'm sorry, we actually don't place teens, we only place children. And then a week later, they got a call about a mother and a daughter, and they called her immediately, and she said, "We'll take them both." And so that was really incredible. So they were good friends of ours. So the young mother was Latina, and my husband is Latino. So what they did was they set us up as kind of a like non-authoritative adults in her life. So she and her baby would come over and have dinner with us. We would go to events together, spend time together, and just kind of connect through culture and things like that. And so we were able to develop a really sweet relationship during that time. But probably about, I would say, 6 or 7 months into her time with this family, it became apparent she was going to sign herself out of foster care. And as she signed herself out at the age of 18, she was not going to be allowed to take her daughter with her. And so the mom that had been fostering her was very pregnant at the time and said, I can't care for, my five children, including a newborn and this baby. And so kind of approached us and said, what do you think? Just really while we were out at girls' night one night. And we were at the time building a house. So we had moved in with friends. And we knew this was the worst idea ever to try to do all these things at the same time. But the Lord really laid it upon my husband's heart. So that night I went home and I said, you're not going to go for this. I know you're not, but this child is going to need a home after her mother signs out of care. And he said, no way, we can't do it. You're crazy. This is not an option. And then the next morning he woke up and said, okay, so what would we have to do? Um,
Hmm.
that was so ever since then, we knew that this was what we were called to, and we have our wonderful daughter.
Aw, do you have other children that you fostered and adopted? Any bios?
No, we had gone through training to foster before my oldest was born, but once I conceived with her, it was not, you know, um, wise for us at that time to pursue adoption or foster care. So we had two biological children, and then after having those two is when we brought our youngest into our home.
Oh, so precious. So she came in that way. And what year was that? How old was she when she came to you?
9 months old, and that was 2018. Mhm.
Oh, wow. Wow. So what was because now were you already, because I've read your bio, so you have all these certifications, you're a professional, you're working with families. Did you have all of those credentials prior to adopting?
Well, it's really funny because I had some of the training. I was a therapist at the time, but I was opening my private practice. Actually, it was the other thing that happened that same year. And I looked back as I was just thinking about this, preparing for our conversation, and I realized that I opened my private practice the same time she came home. And that really that was the Lord preparing me for this world of adoption that I was about to step into. And I really had no idea that that was the direction I would end up going was with such a heavy focus on adoption.
Wow. So what was the adjustment like? Because you knew her a little bit, you'd had some interaction with the birth mom and the baby, I assume, as well. Were there any, because, kids come in this way, they've experienced some trauma, maybe prenatal substance exposure, like all of the things. What was the adjustment like? Were you prepared for the adjustment because of what you knew professionally?
I think in some ways I was. The majority of my education at that point was in trauma, and I had worked with many children in foster care. So that I knew that there would be kind of an adjustment period. I spoke with my husband about it, but it doesn't mean that he really understood. So it was an adjustment for both of us, and I think certainly that was a very challenging year for us living with friends who were so wonderful to go through the process of getting their home approved with us and everything. So that was really helpful because we had really good support that year. We had a team from our church that came around us and helped provide for any needs that we had. So all of that was really helpful. But the biggest thing that I saw pretty quickly with my daughter was that when she came home, she was pretty dissociative. And so, again, with that trauma history, I was able to identify, hey, when we go in to pick her up, she stops crying really quickly. When we drop her off at daycare, because we were required to take her to daycare while she was in foster care, she gets really quiet and her eyes glaze over before we go into the building. So for her, initially, there was definitely the high emotion, kicking and screaming, just frustration that you see with a child that age anyway. But the thing that really concerned us was seeing those levels of dissociation. She slept really well, which was such a blessing, but also indicative of those high levels of dissociation.
Yeah. Wow. So do you know if there was any prenatal exposure to alcohol or anything like that?
So we actually, I started learning about FASD when I went to the Case Institute with that where or TAC, I can't remember which one they call it, but the Training for Adoption Training Center. And so in that process, I learned a little bit about FASD and started to look at my daughter and went, oh, she kind of has these facial features. And so I went to get coffee with a mom from our church and I said, hey, I'm starting to notice some things, noticing the high levels of dissociation and definitely, emotion regulation. And I said, but, she's got this really great vocabulary and she's, really seems to, I think she was around 3 or 4 at the time. She really seems to be a caretaker. She loves to even care for her big sisters. And she kind of laughed and was like, yep, that's FASD. She explained hyperlexia and just some of those strengths associated with FASD. And so we did get her assessed at Emory, the Emory Exposure Clinic, and she did not meet the physical criteria for FAS, which of course has been the experience of a lot of the parents that I work with. But we could see that there were still a lot of those brain-based differences. And so I did, not around the same time, her birth mom was pregnant again with her second child. And so I did contact her and I said, hey, we're seeing some of these things. And I'm wondering if you did drink some during your pregnancy. And fortunately, I mean, the Lord blessed us with a sweet relationship so that I don't think she was heard any shame in, what we were discussing. And she did admit that she did drink and use marijuana during the pregnancy. And then what was really amazing was that she asked me for more information to share with her boyfriend so that she could make sure she didn't make the same choices in her second pregnancy. So that was
Wow.
really awesome. Mhm.
Wow, that's incredible. And that's so good for the next child, right? That came along. So with maternal admission, which most doctors require in order to diagnose, were you able to get a diagnosis of anything on the spectrum?
No, we still were not. So, and I think if we went back and pursued it, we may be able to, but
Yeah.
we haven't worked very hard to get that diagnosis because I kind of know the things that we're doing differently. And so I do feel like if we get to a place where we need those kinds of accommodations and that kind of thing, we might pursue that. But we're at a place right now where I feel like kind of the assumption of FASD is enough for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it presents so differently in so many children, even in siblings who have, like my boys both have the same exact diagnoses, but present differently, right? Even though there's those primary characteristics of FASD that are common, it's, there's so many variables in with, how much a birth mom drank, did she binge drink? What stages in the pregnancy did she drink? How often? Just so many things, genetics, or so many things that factor in. And then sometimes we see things more as kids get older, especially middle school, high school, when their expectations become higher that they have to do things more independently, and then they're not able to. So, so many different variables there. So, has anything surprised you as, being a parent, raising a child who has this history? Anything that surprised you, even though you're a professional?
Yeah, good question. I think one of the things that's maybe surprised me or that I just had to learn a lot about was just she has poor interoception. So she
Hmm.
really has difficulty knowing, when she's hungry, she forgets to eat. She loves food, but frequently we're having to remind her to eat. But then she feels so many things in her stomach as well. So she has frequent stomach aches from, not eating for a long time and then eating a lot and things like that. And so we've really had to adjust our family a lot. So we all kind of work together to keep her on track with her eating. And I think some of those physical differences have been challenging that. And of course, knowing when we need to go to the bathroom and things like that, all of that can be really challenging. So,
Yeah, and that's actually a symptom, and one of the primary symptoms of FASD. There can be those sensory challenges and the interoception, and it could present where a kiddo doesn't have that full feeling, so they just overeat, they chronically overeat, they can become overweight, or like you said, they might not recognize hunger or thirst, so then they need to be reminded to eat. So many ways that does present, and it's interesting because when I heard about her, when I was learning about FASD, and that was one of the things I learned, I used to think, well, I understand the overeating part oftentimes kids in care have a problem with, food insecurity and things, so they're hiding and hoarding food. So it sort of fits with that. But I'd never thought about it in terms of somebody not recognizing that they're hungry. But then I've actually interviewed adults with FASD, and one woman in particular who said, "Yeah, I almost, I can't live, but she's in her 20s. I can't live alone because I almost died once." You know, and it was like,
Oh,
why would you think that? And she said, well, because I went 4 days without eating one time and was hospitalized. And she just said, I didn't feel hungry. I forgot to eat. I didn't think of it. So she too, even in her 20s, needs that support to keep her on track with eating because she doesn't have that sense of being hungry.
I think that's exactly where our daughter is. And I think, like you said, that's why I was so surprised by it, is I had seen so many children who would hoard food
Mhm.
and, would be seeking sugar. And there are times, honestly, still where my daughters, we joke, you're looking for dopamine, it's outside.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
not in the candy drawer. But it really was surprising that she just could not. It took us a little while to figure out, oh, she's hungry. She hasn't eaten. And then it became this pattern. And you're right. It's the thirst is also an issue.
Yeah.
Um, and then dressing for the weather, things like that.
Yeah.
Is really challenging, and we have to remind her, hey, you don't function very well when you're cold. We've got to put it, so your outfit's adorable because she's a little fashionista. But we've got to put some more clothes on because we're not recognizing some of those sensory needs. Mhm.
Yeah. And again, it presents so differently in so many. So neither one of my boys have they do recognize when they're hungry. But one of the things that I noticed, because I work with a lot of families myself, and we have our support group, and it's like if you have a child that's doing a lot of melting down and they're dysregulated, think of that term hangry. Like, how do we get when we're super hungry? And if we have a kiddo that doesn't think to eat, and we don't, and they're not getting regular snacks or regular hydration, it can come out in behavior, and we have to make sure we're connecting those dots. If we can keep them hydrated and keep them with a snack every couple of hours, the Dr. Karen Purvis advice, it can really go a long way, right, in keeping things status quo. So many interesting things that we learn along the way on this journey, right?
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
So that is awesome. So how old is your daughter now, and how is she doing?
Is 8, and she's doing very well. I would say probably 75 to 90% of the issues we have are only when she is dysregulated because of some physical discomfort. But we are talking through regularly. We're in a season where she's has a lot of questions about her first mom. She does know her and, has photos and but just is, asking a lot more questions about her early life and, saying things like, oh, I wish, I could go live with her. And,
Mhm.
unfortunately, as a therapist, I've heard this from other parents. So I've not been surprised by it and I've known not to take it personally. It's still, there's still moments when it's hard, if I'm being real, but for the most part, I'm able to kind of keep that perspective and know she needs to grieve, and that grieving is kind of a long process. So it has been an interesting season as far as that goes, to see that for her. But in other ways, I really have seen, she's got these strengths of being a caregiver. She's very creative and fun. Like I mentioned, she gets like the fashionista award at school every year because she loves to put together cute outfits. So she has no trouble making friends, which feels like a miracle. But now those friendships are getting a little more challenging.
Mhm.
Keeping the friendships has been a little harder. And so we are starting to see a little bit more of those social differences, not understanding maybe, social cues and things like that, that were not as much of an issue when she was younger.
Yeah, that's common. It's common for our kids to be very, very friendly and outgoing and make friends real easily, but then keeping friendships much more challenging. What about school? So I know you've homeschooled. Is she in school? What are you doing for school?
actually in a hybrid homeschool, and this is what one of the reasons that I feel like we haven't had to pursue a diagnosis is because we do have some natural accommodations. Our
Mhm.
children go to a sweet Charlotte Mason school that we love 4 days a week, and then we're home together on Fridays. And while she's there, the everyone knows us really well because it is such a small school. So it's been really good that teachers have been willing to accommodate and understand her needs. We have a very large adoptive population at the school too, so that's also helpful. This is the first year we finally did get a note home about some of those social situations. And so I thought, well, you know what? We made it all the way to second grade. That feels pretty good. Um, so, but fortunately, I was able to talk with the teacher and recognizing, that rejection sensitivity and things like that that are causing some dysregulation and difficulty in relationships. That feeling left out that just feels a lot stronger for our kids sometimes. And so we've been able to work through some of those issues, which is really helpful. Academically, we're starting to see too that math is becoming an issue, which of course is pretty common. And then she's doing pretty well otherwise. That said, we have had, some days where she wakes up in the morning and it's just one of those off days, don't you, Sandra?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And so those days we just have a plan. When those days are hard, she comes into work with me and I've got a place for her to stay while I meet with clients for an hour or two. And then we take her into school after that. She just needs a little more time to
Mhm.
transition usually. And so far that's worked out well.
Sandra Flack, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond, invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets neurobehavioral model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphans.ny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphans.ny.org/hope-community.
So, Melanie, let's talk about the work that you do with children and families through Lifeline. So, share with us what a day is like, what things you're doing.
Yes, thanks for asking. So I am working with children ages 3 to young adults with FASD, and of course, a myriad of clients. So I don't only work with children with FASD, but I work with all adoptive and foster families, and then even just families or individuals with trauma histories, things like that. It's good to have a little variety, so that we're working on a few different things throughout the day. But when I came to Lifeline, I really started working, primarily, of course, with foster and adoptive families, which I had had some experience with, but not quite so much as when I came here. And one of the first things I discovered was that I was seeing these, what seemed to be brain-based differences in a lot of these kids, and kids that didn't have any documented trauma history, children who had been, adopted at birth or, adopted internationally shortly after birth. And what was happening was these families were adopting kids and then bringing them home. And as one mom said, she said, we had no idea we were adopting children with special needs.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's a story you hear all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so true, and especially with when there's the prenatal exposure, sometimes if you don't have that history, and a lot of times in foster care and adoption, you don't get that history. But then you start seeing these behaviors and it looks like, willful disobedience, defiance. They can get diagnosed with so many, I always say the alphabet soup, right, of diagnoses, when really it could be that prenatal exposure that's kind of driving the bus, so to speak. But we don't know, I mean, my boys, we adopted internationally, so we knew, we had that piece of information, so it wasn't hard to get that diagnosis for them. But yet it still didn't prepare us for exactly what was going on, because we got a diagnosis and then there was nothing that came with that other than a pamphlet on ADHD, right? So it's so that it can be so hard for parents, especially not expecting to be, raising children with special needs or brain-based disabilities, can be super hard. So love what you're doing.
Well, and I think one of the things that's been really important is that, like you said, we've got these kids that come in with this alphabet soup of diagnoses, and you've got RAD, oppositional defiant disorder, things like that, and those two specifically, we really try not to diagnose at all, actually, at Lifeline, because it really takes the onus off the parent and puts it on the child in a large way. Right. And to say, so yes, these kids absolutely might meet the criteria for reactive attachment and for oppositional defiant disorder, but then what is the cause of that, and what is the healing process for that? And it's not clear. And for a lot of our kids that do have FASD, a lot of the work that's going to be done specifically for oppositional defiant disorder is really going to be contraindicated, is not going to work well at all. So I know for myself, having kids that have come in where we don't have documented in utero exposure, but we see that there were cleft lip and palate surgeries and things like that that would again indicate a likelihood of, in utero exposure. And so we're working with a lot of those kids, we're really working under the assumption of FASD. We're going to attempt to get those diagnoses, but as you're aware, it can be really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. And the main thing is learning for the parents and everybody involved in the child's life to understand, the brain, how it works differently and how to support, accommodate, build on those strengths. Is that so what do you do? How do you prepare parents? How do you train them?
Thank you for asking. So, primarily, we're going to, of course, go right away to trying differently rather than harder, right? So, helping parents understand what are those primary, secondary, and tertiary symptoms, understanding that, that cause and effect thinking is typically lacking. And so the ways that we're parenting your other biological children is not going to be the same as the way you're going to have to parent this child. And even maybe it's worked for other children you've adopted, but for this child, it's not going to work. So, really helping them to understand that these are brain-based differences. And I think really the first step comes to this, is this place of coming to radical acceptance of, understanding my child does have special needs.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not on purpose, because,
Right.
we call it an invisible disability because you can't tell someone has it by looking at them. And then all of the symptoms are actually, those challenging behaviors are really the symptoms of a brain difference. And our kids need that support. And also that parents know that they're not going to suddenly outgrow it. So
Mhm.
many parents that I've done a training or done a workshop, and then I'll have a parent, sometimes it's the dad, who will say, but when they turn 18, right, we're going to be good, right? And I'm like, no, that's not how this works. So equipping parents, making sure that they're getting the training and their understanding is so important.
Well, and I think even, yes, I think when we're giving them the training that they're getting to this place, and again, that's this grieving process, right? Of they're having to grieve what they thought their life would look like, what they thought their child might be like, and recognizing that even though this child may appear similar to their peers, these brain-based differences really make them, very different. And so the expectations are going to have to change. But really, I find that it's hard to make those changes and those accommodations without that radical acceptance.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
mhm.
because it's so hard. One of the big ones is the whole consequences, right? Because that's what, between the school and, even us as parents, we issue consequences. And, with kiddos, especially with FASD, consequences don't really work because their brain is not able to connect that cause and effect, Short-term memory is a challenge. So they're not able to learn in that way. And that's the whole point, right, of a consequence or the rewards system, right? If I give you a sticker or some kind of reward that will help you to learn this behavior, it really falls flat with kids with FASD, because their brain's not able to learn that way. They need lots of training and coaching and practice and reteaching. So it's longer and it's harder, but I think the consequences just because they don't work and because then I find that kids get more and more frustrated because they're being punished for something that they, really don't have a whole lot of control over.
Well, and then, my concern is always shame, right? That
Yeah.
we're really lumping shame onto them because they think, oh, there's something wrong with me or I'm bad,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, definitely being able to pull back and go, oh no, their brain just works differently,
Yeah.
which, to me, the next step often I think looks like a lot of these parents are dealing with blocked care at this point,
Oh, yes.
coming in with just their nervous systems don't feel
Mhm.
safe around their children because of the dysregulation they've experienced. And so we do a lot of nervous system regulation at that point to
Mhm.
help them. But then we kind of have to move into this narrative as well, helping to redefine the narrative for this child, for the family, So I encourage parents to develop a narrative for their child about, what's different. So when our daughter was young, our narrative was just kids that are adopted have different needs.
Mhm.
Um, and that was really helpful for us because we do have a lot of adoptive children in our community, and that made it easier to help our friends learn to be good friends and things like that. Um, but narrative is important with all of our kids. I have, with one of my daughters, she's a highly sensitive child, and so ever since she was probably 2, she could say, I have big feelings, and just knowing, when she's melting down, it's not because something's wrong with her, she's just has big feelings. So we can start these narratives very early with children actually to help them understand, and they evolve and change over time. But when we can create that narrative, it helps reduce shame for everyone. Um,
Yeah.
and then encouraging families to have a narrative for people that encounter in the community, at church, at school, and then sometimes, if it's just another parent at the baseball game or whatever it is, we might have to be okay with those parents not understanding. Um,
Yeah.
because it might not be appropriate to share a narrative in that situation. So also finding where we have to you know, embrace that, radical acceptance of my child has an invisible disability that people are not going to understand.
Yeah, and it continues over time, right? Because it's in the community, it's at church, it's in school, and then as they get older, if they get a job, So our boys both have jobs. They're in their 20s now, and our youngest is most impacted, so he has a part-time job, and he's a dishwasher at a restaurant, gets lots of support, right? But right now, he's got the month of April off because the restaurant closes during the month of April, and so he's been going to work doing some stuff with my husband, and it was kind of comical. I was very proud of him because I was coming home from somewhere yesterday, and he was already home, and he called me, my son, and he was like, "I had a rough day," and I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Why did you have a rough day?" He was like, "Well, Dad used too many words." And my head could not do too many words. So he's understanding, like he's learning, they have to be able to advocate for themselves at some point. And he has our son, which is very common with people with FASD, slow processing pace. So when they hear verbal, words spoken to them, too many words, they have a hard time with, and they need a little extra time to process. So probably dad, forgetting that that's really the case because he's really good, our son's really good at working outside and doing some heavy lifting, and they were doing, yard work type stuff and clean up outside of an area but yet, too many instructions at one time, right? Like he does better with one step direction and then give him the next one when he's completed that one. So, but for him to be able to call me and say, I had a bad day, Dad used too many words. Um, he recognized that that's hard for him and he needed to let his dad know too many words, and, they have to be able to do that because the older they get, it doesn't just go away. And to be able to, in every environment that they're in, be able to advocate for themselves and recognize this is what works for me and this is what doesn't, and this is where I need some support.
Absolutely. And the more we can help them learn that earlier, then
Yeah.
the easier it'll be for them when they enter adulthood to know this is normal, to need to have, these different needs.
Yeah.
So that's so good. And I love that you mentioned that about too many words, because that's the number one thing I'm learning in my work with my clients is we're spending large portions of our therapy sessions in silence,
Yeah.
because just it's more regulating to the nervous system.
Yeah. Too many words, but very, very common. And, and sometimes I know it, but I'll forget because I like lots of words and I like to talk, but remembering that he can't take that, right? So sometimes when I'm like, we got to get going, we need to leave, and he hasn't done the deodorant and he hasn't, changed his shirt and he hasn't brushed his teeth. And, I can't just spew off, and he has a list, but he doesn't necessarily follow the list. So I just have to like redirect him to the list. So sometimes I hand him the list, or sometimes I hand him a note card with just one thing on it, and just, so there's not even words anymore. Because he'll just get overwhelmed, and then you're less apt to get those things done, especially in time to leave. So just lots of ways to support, lots of ways that we have to learn to accommodate and teach them these things so that they're able to, as they get older, know what they need in order to be successful.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
Yeah.
And oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Finish what you're saying because I have another question.
Well, I was just going to say, I feel like the next step in all of this for families, and really probably one of the most important steps is healing,
Yeah.
and that's a lot of the work that I'm doing with families is really not starting with the child's healing, but starting with the parent's healing.
Yes.
And going back, and of course I'm biased. I love EMDR, but doing EMDR for these parents, helping them to work through what needs they had that were not met. Not just big, as we think of capital T traumas, but what are the times where you felt unseen, you felt
Mhm.
misunderstood,
Yeah.
and we can go back and heal those things, then that brings a lot of freedom to be
Mhm.
able to handle the multiple accommodations. It helps us to be able to hold our tongue instead of naming all of the things that need to be done and just hand them a note card, right? Because we need to be able to be freed from some of those things, because our kids are really our primary trigger for, the things from our own childhoods. Um,
Yeah. And like rejection, if you've had any rejection, because that was one thing I had to navigate through. My parents divorced when I was very little, and my birth father abandoned our family. So not even really realizing that, but when we have children now that, can call us names, who can, I hate you, I wish you weren't my mom, you're not my real mom, like any of those things that a lot of us, I'm sure listeners are nodding their head, right? These are common experiences. If we sense rejection from our child, it can actually, go really deep and, bring up those things in us that, if we had rejection issues, experience that when we were young. So we definitely have to deal with our own things and not bring those to the table, because it can definitely complicate our relationship with our kiddos, how we parent, those kinds of things. So important. I'm glad, Melanie, that you mentioned EMDR, because that was my next question. because because you're certified in so many different therapies, but explain for our listeners who might not know what EMDR is, what that acronym stands for, and how it works.
Great, of course. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a very lengthy description. But basically, when we're doing EMDR, we are tapping into the neural networks that store memories that kind of got stuck. And so what we're doing is, if you think about your memories as being like in a file in your brain in a little filing cabinet, it's kind of been misfiled, right? So we pull the file out, we reprocess everything, and then we put the memory back in kind of the right place. So what we're doing is we're tapping into what happens with when we sleep with rapid eye movement at night. So, if you have had a hard day and you're feeling really frustrated about something, and you think, okay, I'm just going to go to sleep and then I'll see how I feel in the morning. Wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, that's actually not that big a deal. I'm okay, right? Because what's happening is that through rapid eye movement, our brains are reprocessing what we've experienced that day and putting everything in order. So we're just using that same system that already exists to open up those neural networks, take out those memories, reprocess them in a way to help them make sense. So it might be that you had a childhood experience that felt really big at the time, but then when you open up that file with an adult perspective, you start to say, oh, actually, and not just start to say, but start to feel
Mm.
that was actually okay. It was okay that my parent wasn't there in that situation. Or it might be that it was a situation in which it was not okay for your parent to be there. And in those cases, we're just going to minimize the distress that's experienced with whatever was maybe needed and not received in those moments.
And so is EMDR primarily for adults? Does it work in our children? Who should be getting EMDR?
We really are able to do it with any age at this point. So there's definitely ways that are very differently adapted for children. EMDR goes a lot faster with kids. They have, shorter memories, shorter lifespans. So we've got creative ways of doing that, which is really helpful. But it's really amazing to see the transformations in parents and how it changes their relationships with their children. So for myself, I went through 3 years of EMDR to just address my childhood, and it brought about so much freedom. For myself personally, I can share I was someone who had a lot of difficulty asking for what I need and advocating for myself, and so after doing EMDR, I really was able to find my voice a lot more, and it's been helpful, of course, in advocating for my child and for her needs. And so I've been really, really grateful for that.
Wow, fascinating. And then also child parent psychotherapy, because you do that too. What is that?
So child parent psychotherapy is primarily used with young children ages 0 to 8. And so for 0, 8's probably on the high end, but 0 to 6 maybe. But for that's primarily for children who have experienced trauma. And so in those situations, we are going back, we're writing the narrative for what occurred and then helping through play to help the child understand their narrative, understand what might have occurred to them. So as they kind of play out these scenarios with the parent and child together, we are going through and introducing the story with the opportunities that we have through that play to help them have an understanding of what happened to them.
Wow, fascinating. And then diat dyadic, am I saying that right? Developmental psychotherapy, DDP. What is that?
Yes, ma'am. So DDP is again, it's a dyadic therapy. So you're going to notice a theme here, and that is that I really am very passionate about children, especially zero to 12, I'd say, having being in therapy with their parents
Mhm.
wherever possible. So with dyadic developmental psychotherapy, we are really helping parents to understand their children's experiences. But as we're doing that, we're helping to go slowly enough into the child's experience to where they're able to feel it. So a child might come in and say, they had a really hard time after school and made a really big deal about not getting to play, the not getting picked for kickball, and they might come in feeling really upset about that. And so what we're doing is we're entering into that with them. And the foundation of it is something called PACE, which is playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. So we're going to
Mhm.
start with accepting their feeling, whatever it is. And then we're going to express empathy about that feeling.
Mhm.
Understanding, yeah, man, it would be hard not to get picked for the kickball team. But then we're going to be curious, to really figure out what's underneath that, and for our adopted kids, so often that rejection is just right at the surface, and so really getting into that in a place where everything is safe, they know they're safe, the parent is there. And so as a therapist, I might be there coaching the parent to say, hey, mom, maybe you want to say like, but I bet that's really hard. Man, yeah, not getting picked. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
And so where we're really keeping the focus on the child, but we're entering into that pain with them. And then, of
Mm.
course, playfulness is, a great way to kind of bring us back up. So then it might be some silliness, some sarcasm, but it might be playing a game, something like that to get to a place where we're kind of going down to enter into where they are, but then bringing them back up at the end.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So you are an adoption competent therapist. So I know it's so hard, especially the families we have in our support group and whatnot. It's really hard to find a therapist that understands FASD, but we all need, our kids, if therapy is necessary, an adoption competent therapist would be ideal. So exactly what is that, and how would our listeners go about finding one?
So I that came from training through the Case Institute. So for parents who want to find an adoption competent therapist, I would look for the Case Institute online. That is the Center for Adoption Support and Education. And so they will have a list of therapists who have completed training with them. And with those adoption competent therapists, they're going to be therapists that have learned the specific needs of children that have adopted, and that does not guarantee that they'll necessarily have the types of therapies, training in the types of therapies that we would promote, but they do have a really good understanding of attachment and the specific needs of children who've been adopted. So they're going to focus less on the behavior modification and more on the attachment.
Yeah, so, so important with our kids. So you're able to serve children and families in so many ways with all of these different things that you just shared. What's your favorite part of the work you do?
Ooh, I really think my favorite part of the work that I do is actually helping parents to heal to a place where they can provide felt safety for their children in the way that they need. I think that's where I see the biggest change in families is when parents heal.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Love that. So I know that you're in Georgia. Are you only able to work with families in Georgia? How would our listeners be able to reach out to you if they are interested in whether they're in Georgia or not?
So yes, so I am only in Georgia. I'm only able to work here as of now. We're working on a compact to be able to work in all 50 states, but that has not gone through yet. So however, Lifeline, if you want to go to lifelinechild.org, we have therapists in Georgia, Louisiana, Alabama, North Carolina, and I'm probably missing another state or two, but South Carolina. But we do have a lot of therapists, especially throughout the Southeast. So, and then we have parent coaches who are able to provide a lot of the same similar types of support, and they are able to cross state lines. And so those are great resources that I would recommend people start with, maybe even before going to therapy, because our parent coaches are so specifically trained in how to help adoptive families. That is often a good place to start before you figure out what kind of therapist you might be looking for.
Yeah, and is that kind of thing available, the coaching online? Is that an online service?
It is
Yes.
online,
Great.
yeah.
And we'll make sure that we put a link in the show notes to Lifeline so everybody can check it out, because we've got listeners from all over the country. So if you're in the Southeast, you've got a good chance of being able to get connected. But even either way, the link will be there. So Melanie, you chose the verse that we opened with today. I'll just read it again. And this is Jesus saying, "Abide in me and I in you, as a branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me." So what does John 15:4 mean to you?
I have really learned that this work cannot be done without abiding in the Lord.
Mm,
Um, I know that for myself, that peace is only found when I abide in Him, when I
mm,
stay in His presence. And I found that, with the children that we work with, they are highly attuned to us. Any shift in our internal state is noticed. And so that abiding in the Lord is the only thing, staying in the vine, is the only thing, that steadiness that steadies me to be able to stay and do the work that the Lord has called me to.
Love that. Love that. Before we go to our wrap-up question, I do know that you have a training, an online training coming up that you want to share with our listeners.
Thank you. So I do have an online training coming up on June 30th. It'll be from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock Eastern time. And we are going to focus, it's going to be a training both for parents and for professionals. So we are looking at what are the various ways for therapists to work with children with FASD to support these families. So primarily, helping therapists and parents understand those, of course, primary, secondary, and tertiary symptoms, but then really looking at how can therapists support families as they heal from those secondary symptoms, from the ruptures that have occurred, the healing that would benefit parents, and what are the various modalities that can be used to help with those things.
So
So,
it's for professionals as well as parents?
yes. So if you have your child is in therapy, please encourage them to attend because we are hoping that to equip more therapists to better understand FASD and how to work with children with FASD. So if they want to go to the Lifeline website and then find the events page and then look at June, that is where all that information will be listed.
Wonderful. So, if parents listening, if your child is in therapy, you want to encourage their therapist to attend this training, right? As well as parents can attend the training as well. So, that's super important because we do want to see therapists who are not only trauma informed, but FASD informed. And this is a great way for them to be able to do that. So, wonderful. Love that. We will put a link in the show notes so that folks can be able to easily find where they can sign up for that training. So wonderful. Thank you for doing that and providing that. Melanie, as we wrap up, our listeners are primarily foster and adoptive moms like us. Would you offer some words of encouragement today as we close out?
Yes, absolutely. I just want to say to everyone that the journey that you are on now is it's a tough one. We know how tough it can be, but the Lord who has called you is faithful. And the encouragement that I've experienced is seeing the freedom that parents have come to in the Lord as a result of caring for their children. And I often wonder if the Lord has brought these children with their unique needs into our homes so that we can experience the freedom He desires for us to have.
Oh, amen to that. Wonderful, encouraging words. So, thank you so much, Melanie, for all that you do on behalf of children and families and the families that you're serving, and for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I appreciate it.
And as always, thank you for tuning in to the adoption and foster care journey today. I hope you were inspired by my conversation with Melanie Villalta. Be sure to connect with her through the link in the show notes. You can go to Lifeline Children's Services, and also there's that training, especially for therapists to learn more about FASD. You can refer your child's therapist to. That would be great. You can find out all that information in the show notes. Not only do we want to inspire and encourage you here through this podcast, we have resources to help equip you for your unique parenting journey. If you're raising kids with FASD, I highly recommend you become a member of our Hope for the FASD Journey online support group. It is an incredible place to connect with fellow parents and caregivers who are raising children with trauma histories and prenatal exposure to FASD. Our members currently, we've got members who have children with FASD from ages 4 to 25. And so you will be able to connect with parents who've been on this journey for a very long time, who've learned a whole lot. I am there, and my fellow adopted mom, FASD facilitator, Debbie Raymond, she and I co-lead the group. We meet the first 3 Tuesday nights of every month. And the second Tuesday night, we have a VIP guest on. So this would be a professional, sometimes as well as a parent who will come on, share their FASD experience and their professional guidance and information, and then we get to ask them questions. So it's sort of like an interactive podcast in a way, but we get to learn from professionals in the FASD space, which is super helpful, and always learning. We just had a guest on. She will be an upcoming guest on this podcast, and just learned so much from her, things that I didn't even know, and we learned them in the support group. So, and of course, you'll get encouragement and support, and it is all faith-based. We pray for one another, encourage one another. So, and we also have our retreat that you heard about earlier. So check that out. Link in the show notes, of course. And if you want more of a one-on-one experience where you just kind of want to unpack what's going on with your particular kiddo, look for strategies and accommodations, and you know what's going on, and you want to learn, I do offer one-on-one coaching for parents and caregivers of kids with FASD, so that you can go that route. Sometimes our support group members actually sign up for coaching as well, so that they can get some one-on-one. So lots of opportunities, and of course, my online and in-person FASD workshops and training. Learn all about all of the above at our website, justicefororphans.ny.org/AFCJ. Link in the show notes. Please subscribe to this podcast, follow it, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parenting friends, so that they can learn about this podcast and be encouraged and inspired and equipped as well. Don't forget, we also post all of the video versions of this podcast on the Justice for Orphans YouTube channel. Connect with us there. So I am grateful that you spent your valuable time with me today. I am thrilled to have you along for the journey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans. And check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.